Welcome to the Shaman Stories podcast, the podcast in which we interview people about their journey into spirit. I'm your host, Jeremy, and today with me we have Shawndra. Please say the last name again.
McWhorter.
Order. Sorry about that. We just went over it and name change and all that good stuff. So
And it's not an easy name, so
mine's not much better. Chinvert doesn't roll off the tongue that well either. Well, welcome. Thank you for coming. Why don't you let the people know a little bit about what you do today?
all right. Thank you so much for having me. I am an animal communicator, so I have opened myself up to be the conduit, the hollow bone, to connect to them telepathically through a heart connection. I also do Reiki, so I am a Reiki master, a Sui and Karuna Reiki master. I have incorporated tuning forks, which humans love. Animals really love the tuning forks, which is amazing, especially horses. So that has been really beneficial. And I do shamanic journeys as well in some of the more difficult cases where they're having trouble, usually with an animal that has been abused, and they're having trouble opening up. I can get in with a shamanic journey, which has been really, really helpful. And so I've been doing this since 2000, actually. So about 25 years I've been doing this work. And I recently published a book, What They Want Us to Know. And it's not a how-to book. It's actually messages from 12 different species of animals, what they want humans to know, which is pretty cool. So, and that's something I do as well, is what I call soul messages. So if it's not something like a end-of-life issue or a behavioral or physical issue with an animal, humans can tune into and get a deeper message for maybe why they're here, what some of their struggles are, that kind of thing. And some of those messages have been really profound.
Nice. Yeah, we'll definitely dig into that. I'm interested for sure on the communication side and how you're using the shamanic journey techniques with that as well.
Yeah.
But with this podcast, we like to kind of start at the beginning. So, what was life like for you as a young child? Did you have these kind of abilities? Were you raised in a family that kind of promoted this kind of thinking, or was it completely the opposite?
It's kind of a mix that I always was connected with animals, more to animals than humans. And not that I dislike humans, but I just connected to them. And I was always the little girl that would move the snails out of the way, or move the worms out of the way, or open a window and let a fly out. Those kinds of things. And my parents, thankfully, were not raised to be super open-minded, but they both went through challenges in their own childhood. And for some reason, they just knew that being open and accepting was a way to be, which is fantastic. And so they accepted me, even though I was pretty much the different one. And I would talk to animals and things like that, but I never listened back. I mean, I can remember being, I was still in high school, maybe junior high, and we saw this documentary, and it was called, what did they call it? I can't think of it now. Thought Commands. And so this guy would be looking at, he'd be sitting here, his dog would be facing him, and his wife would be on the other side of the dog. And she would have just flip cards that said, sit, roll over, speak, whatever. And so he would look at the card and without moving, then look at the dog and think, and the dog would do it. I thought, wow, that's cool. What I didn't pick up on though was the communication back that the animal, so we did it with our dog at the time, and I could tell there were times when she was basically what I call giving me the paw. If she could flip me off, she would be like, I'm done playing this game, and I never picked up that she was talking back to me and I just wasn't listening. So, we were open in that respect, and I had a really good childhood. We had dogs that we rescued and loved and cared for and things like that. And apparently my father's mother was half Native American, and she could talk to animals, and everyone just knew she's the one who talks to animals. But it's not something that I ever really, delved into, or, we explored it when I was younger.
Interesting. So, at what point in your life did you decide to listen?
Yeah, good question. In the year 2000, a friend approached me and asked if I would rescue a dog. It was a 5-year-old black lab named Joey, and it was one of their neighbors, and the neighbor had died, and there was nowhere else for this dog to go. They didn't want to take it to the shelter. So I said, yeah, I'll do it. And I had one older dog at the time, Samson. And so I brought Joey in, and I realized he's not like any dog I've ever seen before. And he was challenging, and he became dangerous. And it would be where he would just play, and he would chase the ball for hours. He just would play and play and play. But then he would just suddenly snap and go after and attack. And I mean, there were like 4 times I barely got back to where I could put something in front of him or hold it because he was on full attack mode. And I was looking for answers. And that's how a lot of humans are, you know, we don't really push ourselves out of our comfort zone unless something forces us to. And so I desperately wanted to help him, and I didn't know how. So I was looking for answers. And I had learned T-touch, and I had taken him to a T-touch practitioner, which helped some, but not a lot, you know, it helped like in the moment. And then I came home one day, because at the time I was living with my parents, and they were watching my sister's son, who was about 7 years old at the time. And I came home, and my father's arms were completely bandaged. Yeah, Joey had attacked him, and he'd had to go to the hospital and be sutured up and that kind of thing. And I knew, I can't ethically give him to anyone else. I don't know what else to do. And at that time, you know, we didn't know about trazodone and gabapentin and all those things. But I had heard from the T-touch practitioner that there was a thing called animal communication. And so I called her and I said, who do you know? And it was a woman named Jerry Ryan out of San Francisco. She gave me her number. I called her late on, I think it was a Monday night, and left this desperate message saying, please, I'm desperate. You got to help me. I don't know what to do. And she called me back, and we had about a 2-hour session, and she told me things about Joey that resonated. I knew in my soul were true. And apparently Joey had been abused by this man his entire life. And Jerry Ryan was a child psychologist as well, working with trauma victims. And she said, basically what's happening is at a cellular level, we hold on to memories. And so he would play, he would do something, and they would just flash. And so he would just lash out, rip and tear, and then those hormones or whatever would be released and he was fine. And then, you know, meanwhile, we're kind of still panicked because we almost got attacked, or my father did get attacked. And he actually asked to be let go. And it kills me still now, 25 years later. We had to euthanize him because he was dangerous and it wasn't his fault. And it started me on the journey. And so I took Jerry's class, which was just a few months later, and I learned so much, so much. It was amazing, the connection and the depth and hearing what they were saying, which was all new to me because all of us talk to our animals. We all, you know, speak to them. But actually listening and hearing what they say was just mind-blowing. And in that class, I actually met 2 Reiki masters, which I'd never heard of Reiki. And I ended up training with them and became a Reiki master. And then it's all been from there that has happened. So that one dog, Joey, altered my path dramatically.
I mean, yeah, I'm sorry you had to put him down. That's,
Yeah.
at least I mean, it sounds heartless, but at least you gave him what he wanted.
Yes. And that's true. No, that really is. And honestly, it took me 3 years to get over the guilt. I did not tune in and connect with Joey for 3 years because I felt so guilty about just the thought of he suffered so I could learn. And then I realized it's so much more than that. It's not all about me. He had his own path. That man who abused him had his own path, and all of many other people. But when I did finally tune into him, and you can communicate with them after they pass, that he was like, I'm not angry. I don't hate you. I love you. This is not all about you. This is about me as well. And we had a really good conversation. I could let go of that guilt and that shame and that blame that was serving no purpose.
Nice. That's beautiful. Real quick, though, what is T-touch? I've never heard of that.
T-touch, it's called Tellington touch, and it's basically where you will go and I don't know the dynamics of it exactly, but it's hands-on therapy where you will start and basically just do one circular movement and then move to another part of the body and then move to another part of the body. And so your intent is to bring healing. And as I recall, because it's been so many years since I've done it, but it's similar to like tuning forks or acupuncture or acupressure where you're moving the energy and you're intuitively called where to go on the body.
Okay.
And you're helping move that energy, anything that might be stuck.
Interesting. Yeah, I never heard of it, so I wanted to get
Yeah.
clarification. And so with that, so you worked with Joey, that happened, you learned from it, you got more teachings, you moved into Reiki as well. Like, where did you kind of go from there? Because I've also heard that you've worked at the Wolf Haven.
Yes, I
Working with,
volunteered out at Wolf Haven, and I actually had started at Wolf Haven in 1996, and so then I didn't start my healing practice until 2000 or so, and it became important to me to connect to those wolves in a way, because they're captive, and not because they want to be, but because they can't be put into the wild. They came from captive situations, research facilities, or ownership, pet ownership, or whatever, zoos and things like that. And so being able to connect with the wolves in the sanctuary and give them some peace of mind and know that we care and we're working to change this where they won't be in a captive situation. And also with wild wolves, that was really different. And the first time I connected with a wild wolf, it was out in Idaho. I actually went out, it was called a Wolf Guardian program. And so we were working with Defenders of Wildlife and the Nez Perce Indian tribe, going out and working with sheep ranchers and trying to bridge that gap between ranchers and wildlife. And connecting with the wild wolves was completely different. And I had been told that wild animals typically don't want to speak to us. And so for a long time, I didn't try. And then I realized, oh, that's not the case. That's someone else's belief. That's their truth. And I learned, they taught me that it is very different. They don't necessarily want to have a conversation like we do with our pet dog or something, but they have a lot of things to say. And they guided me and opened my heart in ways that I hadn't known yet, which was amazing, which was talking to like animals that had passed on and really being able to trust that and go with that and being able to help captive animals, give them hope that humans are helping them. Most of us want to do something right. They want to do something and make more balance. We just don't know how sometimes. And the animals have helped me do that.
Nice. Yeah, because I know around here where I'm at, and even myself, I have like a small hobby farm. So I have sheep, chickens, every now and then I'll have pigs on, and my neighbors, they have a cattle ranch. And so it's always that we don't want to necessarily shoot the coyotes, but we don't want them taking the livestock, and is trying to
Right.
put those boundaries between us. At least shamanically, I try to, when I open up my sacred space, I kind of protect everything
Yeah.
within my property and ask,
Right.
keep keep my animals safe as much as possible. Obviously, it's not 100%, but since I've started doing this work, I've noticed I have less and less problems with coyotes.
That is so cool.
We have 50 acres of untouched land. It's not mine, it's just next to my house.
Hmm.
They're out there all night. I'm like, y'all do you.
That's
Stay
right.
over there. We're going to stay over here. No
We can all
worries.
get along.
If something of mine gets on that side, it's fair game. That's just what it is.
Right. Yeah. And that's where a lot of it comes through in a more practical sense is that, we don't want to make it easy for predators to come in and take, we don't leave trash out. We don't leave food out. We don't leave animals, especially during birthing, those kinds of things. We make it more difficult for them. And there are non-lethal ways that you can haze an animal, and they do that with wolves and with coyotes as well. But it is, I think, even more powerful when you're tuning in shamanically, when you're doing that intent to say, I understand that you have a right to live here too, but this is mine and that's yours.
Yeah, it's like
Yeah,
just respect our boundaries. All the deer and elk are on that side anyway, so
that's
go
right.
go
That's
do
your
what you gotta
natural
do.
prey.
And
Yeah.
so I guess that was kind of one of my next questions of when you're talking to the wild animals versus, the more domesticated animals, do you find, because you mentioned they're not really into having a conversation, but what kind of lessons are the wild animals teaching versus the domesticated,
Really good question.
or things
And
that they might be asking for?
yeah, the domesticated animals, a lot of them, not all, but almost all of them, the messages they have apply directly to the human that they're sharing their life with. And a lot of times humans will do more for their animals than we will for ourselves. And so that's when I get called in because they can't figure something out. And so those messages from their cat, dog, horse, whatever it happens to be, a lot of times will apply to the human and they're like, oh, I get it. And I was told, gosh, probably back in 2002 by a medicine woman that I'm a pathfinder. I help people find their way. So it's not necessarily mine to walk the path with them or to guide them the whole way. It's just to plant those seeds and point out those doors, those paths that they may not have seen. And so that's where the domestic ones come in. The wild animals tend to be very deep, philosophical, and more global in their messages, where they want to help humans grow and evolve and even ascend. And that's something that I learned. I didn't know we can ascend while still alive in our bodies. And it's like, Really? Okay. So we can do that, and that's where these messages can help us when it resonates. And you're like, oh, that's what I'm looking for. I mean, little things like the animals taught me basically. In every situation, almost every situation, we have three choices to make. We can bring balance, we can remain neutral, or we can cause harm. And it doesn't matter what it is, we get to choose how to respond. And hopefully we would choose balance. But there are some times when I'm not in a good enough mood to plant those seeds or be that healer or something. And that's when I choose to remain neutral. And I consciously choose not to cause harm. But I didn't have that awareness of that concept until they had basically pointed it out to me. And I use the word balance most of the time because there's no real emotional attachment to balance, where there is to good, bad, right, wrong, broken, fixed, that kind of thing. And humans typically don't want to be broken, bad, and wrong. But if we're looking at balance, and you look at anything in your life, whether it's addiction or racism or human trafficking, it doesn't matter what it is, depression, you can look at it and say, is that balanced? And most people would be able to agree and say, no, that's not balanced. And then it's a different conversation to say, how do we bring balance to this situation? As opposed to, does that feel right to you? And nobody wants to be wrong. And we're like, well, and they start making excuses or get defensive. And so it's a completely different energy and conversation. And again, all of these things have come from animals guiding me to certain books or certain classes or just in shamanic journeys or, conversations that I've had with them. And it's like, wow. And that's why, I'm so excited to share it with people because it can make a huge difference.
Yeah, that's interesting for sure. And because then, in my lineage, we call it, living in Aini, which is basically balance.
Yeah,
It's trying to make sure that we stay in balance of everything, and we try not to cause harm. We don't need to necessarily be over good, but just staying in that balance of, giving and receiving, regardless what we're
right.
doing.
Beautiful.
It's not easy, but that's the goal.
That's the goal. And that's the thing is we are human and we will make mistakes. And that's where we can afterwards, and I'm not saying I've done it perfectly every time, is we can ask ourselves those questions like, why did that trigger me? What was that about? And not use shame and blame, but just ask ourselves those deeper questions and be honest with ourselves of what the answers are. And say, oh, maybe I got angry at that person because I feel trapped in a job and I don't feel like I can talk to my boss or whatever it is. I mean, you get to the point where you're actually finding the cause to these triggers rather than blaming yourself for being triggered. And again, that energy is completely different.
Yeah. And seeing what you get out of being triggered.
Yes,
That's that full circle of the victim triangle, Yeah, you might be a victim in this moment, but what are you getting out of it, and why are you not making those steps to change?
right.
Because we all have that ability to get out of a situation to some degree. Now, granted, not everything is perfect, and some people have a harder time than others, and I recognize that, but at some point, there's a way to get out of something. There's a way to
Yes,
make a change, and maybe that step forward isn't the perfect step, but one step leads to the next, and then eventually you get out of the whole situation.
right. Absolutely. I completely agree with that. And it's asking those and being honest with ourselves without the shame and blame, because that serves no purpose, I don't think. But
I agree.
yeah.
And with that, then, so the animal communication came. How much do you mix, Reiki into the mix? And you mentioned tuning forks too. So, yeah, I mean, I kind of have it in my head where you're having a communication with them, and then maybe they need something more than just talking, and then you start doing the extra.
Yes, exactly. And I almost always use the Reiki to ground and center myself and protect my environment, that kind of thing, and create a strong heart connection with them. And then it is the heart to heart connection telepathically that I'm having. And there are times, a lot of times, when I am sending Reiki. And I don't really do the tuning forks remotely. I will do those in person, but it doesn't mean you can't. But a lot of times it is just that Reiki that sends that energy to where they can just calm their system down just a bit, trust me a little more. Because what I've realized is a lot of times is when I tune into them, I'm speaking to their physical selves. And so that's fine. We're here. But what I really need to get to is their spiritual self. And I can get there when they really trust me And when I clear away some of those blockages, that they have the wall up to where I can get to their spiritual self and have a different conversation. So it's, and that's, I think with humans too, we do the same thing. And I don't telepathically communicate with humans. I have made a choice not to. Doesn't mean I can't. And there are some instances where I was like, ooh, I wish I knew that. And so I probably will learn it or push myself. And that's me asking myself, what's my trigger to stop myself from doing this? Because I do the Reiki, I do the tuning forks, I do the healing work, but for some reason, telepathically, I don't know whether I just don't trust humans or I don't trust myself. I don't know. But that's, a work in progress. But and I think most people, well, inherently trust animals. We probably all have heard, if my dog doesn't like you, neither do I. And, children and animals are really good judge of character. And I just inherently trust, because I have been wounded by humans before, deeply wounded. And it was funny because when I first started doing communication and Reiki, I said, I will only work on animals. I'm not going to work on humans. Humans are, you're adults. You can make your own minds up. You can make your own choices, and that's up to you. And then about, I don't know, it was like 8 months later, I started working on humans, but only because it helped the animals. I was like, I'm only doing this because it's going to help your dog or whatever it was. And then it took about 1.5 years, finally, between all of it, and went, oh, I get it. We all are worthy of being treated well. We all are worthy of finding our balance. I get it, and I really get it. I see it as that circle of life where one is not better than the other. But it took me a while to do it.
Yeah, and with the shamanic side of things, it's, the stone people, they're the oldest, they're the really big teachers. And then we have the plant people, they're kind of next in line for teaching. And then we have animals, and then we have humans. Even though humans are technically animals, we're like the youngest, we're like the babies. So we
Yes.
still need to listen to everyone else first to get that information that we need for learning, and then we're ready for it. But it's like we're the wee babies of everything on this planet.
Yeah. But we're sure we're not. That ego of ours is so strong. Like, no, we know.
We act
I've
like
got
we're
the
not.
answers.
Yeah, and I would be concerned with the whole telepathically reading people of, it might just get overwhelming, or you're just going to get things that you don't want to know or don't want to hear. Like, it could be, you get kind of like when you watch those movies where it's like those mediums, they can look at someone or they touch them and they see all the evil things they do and the crimes they've committed. And now you're stuck with all this downloaded information that you just
Right?
don't want.
Yeah. And I don't want that. Yeah. I mean, the good thing is, from my experience, is it only happens when I request it or allow it. So it's not, and that was one of the first questions I asked Jerry Ryan in her class is like, am I going to hear every wounded animal, every homeless animal? Because that will break my soul. I can't do it. And she goes, no, no, you have to agree to it. You have to initiate it. They have to agree to it. So it is like whenever I tune in, I introduce myself, I tell them why I'm there, and I ask them, are you willing to have a conversation with me? And almost always they say yes, because they're grateful for that. They want us to be more connected. There are times sometimes when they're like, you know what, I do, but not right now. And I honor that. And I will honor when an animal has been abused. And I tell the people that because a lot of times people will ask me and say, tell my cat to stop urinating here. Tell my dog to stop barking. Tell my horse to stop chewing, whatever it is. I don't tell animals to do anything or to stop doing anything. I ask them why they're doing something. And we see if we can figure out the cause and find out why that's out of balance, because that's not balanced behavior. And I'll give you a perfect example. There was a man who reached out to me. They have, at the time, I think they had 4 cats. And one cat suddenly started urinating on his chair. Not his wife's chair, nowhere else on the house, his chair. Took him to the vet. There was no urinary, there was no kidneys, there was nothing wrong physically. The blood was fine. He's like, can you tell me what's going on? And so I connected, got permission. And I mean, the conversation lasted like 2 minutes. It was amazing. And right away, the cat just said, this is not about me. This is about him. Okay, can you tell me a little more? And he didn't know the words to say he needs to go see a doctor, but he's like, he needs help. And I saw kind of an office doctor situation. Like sometimes I get visuals, sometimes it gets words, sometimes it's just images. And so and he said, will you tell him? And I said, as soon as you and I are through, I'm going to call him and tell him this right now. And so I did. I hung up and I called him and I said, this is what happened. And he's like, you know what? I'm going to call the doctor right now. And he had no physical symptoms. Nothing was wrong with him. So he called the doctor, got an appointment right away, got an urgent, and turns out he had early prostate cancer. And the cat was telling him, pay attention. This is not normal behavior. Whereas if I had just said, stop doing that, wouldn't have done anything, would not have helped the man at all. And who knows, and he ended up going through treatment and is alive to this day. So it's, who knows how much worse it would have been, or if it would have killed him if he'd waited until he had symptoms. But that cat sent a very definite message. And that's when we can be open to, rather than stop doing that, it's like, you didn't used to do that. What is that about? And maybe asking a few questions rather than just stop doing it. Sometimes they're just being jerks. They can, but
Yeah, my wife got a kitten when I was on one of my deployments, and so he never met me. And then I come back to visit, and all of a sudden he's just peeing on all my clothes that are on the floor. I'm like, what are you like?
yeah,
I was just taking away his mom, basically.
right.
6 months later, he got used to me and he stopped doing it. I'm like, oh, okay.
Thank goodness. But at least you knew. Yeah, he was posturing. He was like, I thought I was the man of the house. And you're like, no, actually I am.
Yeah, we got him fixed and he stopped real quick.
Thank goodness. Yeah.
I was like, this is what we got to do, man, because I'm not playing this game with you. Because no matter
No.
if I put anything down, he just jumped on it and he
Yeah.
wasn't spraying. He literally just peed on it. And I'm like,
Wow.
me and him had some words for the first couple months. He was a
Yeah.
good cat, though. He just passed away
Aw.
2 years ago now, I think. But he lived for quite a while. Like,
Nice. That's awesome. He had a good life. Yeah.
I think so. We tried.
Right? Yeah. And there was one horse in particular that really taught me, it just opened my mind more than I think almost any other. I don't know, but it was a horse that had passed away. The horse had colicked and they'd had to euthanize it. And so the woman contacted me and asked some of the things that they typically, almost all of us do, are you okay? I'm sorry. I love you. Do you forgive me? And they always do. Just spoiler alert, they always do forgive us and they always still love us. And so I tuned in, I connected with Jazz, the horse, and right away he showed me an image of him standing in a barn with his right front hoof in a bucket, and the woman that had hired me standing there just brushing his mane and kind of, brushing him, and it was a pleasant enough experience. And then we asked some of the questions, and every once in a while he would throw in this image of just this big human grin. So I'd write it down every time I saw it. And then at the end, I always, after we're all done, I ask, is there anything you would like to ask, say, or share? And he said, tell her to plant the flowers I love. I said, okay, will she know what those are? And he showed me an image of them, and they were like kind of flat-petaled, sort of purplish periwinkle flowers. And so I wrote that down, and I thanked him, and we closed it. I typed it all up, and I sent it to her, and she called up so excited. She goes, okay, first of all, you don't know his backstory, right? I'm like, no, how could I? And she was the third owner. So a woman had owned him first and moved to the East Coast, couldn't take him with her, sold him to this second gentleman, who then sold him to the third person I was working with. And when the client that I was working with got him, he had a huge abscess on his right front hoof, and twice a day for over a week, they would stand in the barn and soak his hoof and clean it. I mean, how could I know that? And so she knew right away that I was connected, and I wasn't just going, oh, he's happy, he loves you, everything's fine. And the smile we were talking about, she's like, I don't know, it doesn't mean anything to me. I'm like, maybe he's trying to reassure you. I don't know. Neither one of us had an answer for that. And then she goes, but the flowers. She goes, oh my God. She goes, I got to tell you. So she had planted flowers alongside her house in a flower box. He had gotten out of his pasture and eaten all of the flowers. So the flowers I love. And she goes, you know what they are? And I'm like, no, I don't know the name. She goes, they're forget-me-nots. Oh my God. So almost a year later, she calls me back and says, you remember? I said, yeah, I remember you. And she goes, I got to tell you something. The most amazing thing just happened. That the first woman who had moved to the East Coast was back visiting on the West Coast and had found this woman's name and number, and knew that Jazz was living with her. And she said, I'd love to come see him. And she had to unfortunately say, I had to have him euthanized, and this is why. And the woman was sad. I mean, of course. And she's like, I always thought if he could, he would have just had the biggest grin on his face all the time. It's like, what? This horse sent a message for a woman that neither of us knew, we had no intention of ever meeting, and yet it changed her world. And it was like, how is that even possible? I mean, it's just kind of mind-blowing that they know so much more, and they are so much more connected. And I think we can know that much when we open ourselves up to it and allow that in without fear or without judgment and without the ego. And, we all have, our own personal choice of things to do. So I could have just discounted the smile and never told the woman. And when she was on the phone with the other woman, and she could have just said, "Oh, this is crazy. She's going to think I'm crazy. I'm not going to say anything." But thankfully, we both honored our path, and it was a beautiful thing. But still something that at the time, I mean, it's just like, how do I explain that? I don't even know how to explain that. And not everything needs explanation, I don't think. Sometimes we just have to go on faith and go, it's happened, it's real, and it's beautiful.
Yeah, I would agree. And especially in like my line of work, when I'm working with clients and doing journeys and stuff, it's the same thing. I'm not going to put any interpretation on any of this. I'm just going to tell you what I saw.
Yeah.
I would say 9.5 out of 10 times it resonates 100% and they know exactly what I'm talking about. And I'm going, I don't know, does this make sense to you? Because I saw, a shoe and this and this and this. And they're like, yeah, that happened to me when I was blah, blah, blah. I'm like, all right, cool. So here's the
Yeah.
information. Like, I don't know what
Right?
else. Like, you
Yeah,
just
and
can't
it's
put,
not something we can really replicate in a laboratory, and do again and again, but we know it's real.
yep,
We know it has value. And for me, it's really heartening to know that there's more than our physical world and what I think I know, and we can expand on that and connect at a much deeper level, And anybody can do. I mean, you don't have to learn animal communication to be open to these kinds of things. I mean, like just the other day, I've lived where I live now since '96, I guess, and I was out mowing the lawn, which I do all the time, and we live on a lake. And we have bullfrogs out there, and I see them, but they're always jumping away. I hear them squeak and jump away. Well, I was mowing the lawn, and I saw this bullfrog sitting like on top of the water. And every time I'd go down the road and come down the road, he was there and then a second one showed up, and I'm like, that's not normal. So it's normal for me to hear bullfrogs and see them jump away, but not sit there right in front of me going, "Hey, I've got a message for you." So that's when I stopped and said, "Okay, I'm listening. You have my attention." And the message was basically something is on its way. Don't fear it. Be ready for it. Like, thank you. Okay. So any of us can do that. You find something that is not normal behavior for the animals that might surround you or something. You're like, are they trying to get my attention? And just listen to what your heart says and see if you can be open to those messages. Not everything requires a communicator. Sometimes you can just get that love or that balance or that reassurance from an animal. And especially with, like for me, I struggled with depression for decades and suicidal ideation. And because I had learned that the animals don't lie, they can't, they were the only ones I trusted because I had convinced myself that all the humans, even my family, agreed with the horrible things I was saying about myself and the names I was calling myself and how I was not worthy of being alive. Because I'm like, they're just being nice. No one says you can actually say, yeah, Shawndra, you are the most effective piece of garbage that has ever lived. Yeah, you should off yourself. But that's what I was telling myself, and that's what I had convinced myself that my friends and family would say if they were just honest enough, which is totally not true. And one day, and it was, I forget when, and I'd written down this letter and I'd had it. I was done. And I started writing down, because I'm kind of that way. I'd written down everything that was wrong with me, how defective and broken and unfixable I was, and how hideous, blah, 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 blah. All these horrible things that I believed were true. And then on the other side of the paper, I wrote down everything I had tried to fix myself. And over 20 years or so, I had tried, it was 27 different modalities that I had tried. So I looked at it and said, yeah, I'm a piece of garbage, and yeah, I've tried to fix it and I can't. It's not like, I read a book and said, oh, I can't fix it anymore. I had really honestly tried, and I'm like, I'm done. I can't do it anymore. And just then, I felt the animals come in. And it wasn't any one species, it was them as a collective, and saying, we don't think that about you. We never have thought it, and we never will. And I couldn't twist their words because I knew they can't lie. They don't. I knew they were speaking the truth. And I tried to twist their words, and I couldn't. So as long as I had the thought, it's like, am I wrong? Am I the one not being honest here? Could they be right? And as long as I had that question in my soul, I couldn't do it. I could not take action, which thankfully I didn't. And it's not like it was rainbows and butterflies from then on, but it got me thinking. It shifted my perception to where maybe I wasn't as horrible as I had convinced myself I was. Maybe there was something I hadn't tried that I needed to try in order to bring balance to my life. And that's what happened. And it took still a few years for that to happen, but it was shift after shift after shift. And it was the animals. I give them credit for guiding me to the people and the other modalities that did bring balance to my life and give me the will to live and the firm belief that I am worthy of being alive.
Wow. Yeah, that's impressive. That's impressive. Yeah, I'm glad you didn't. I mean, that's a
Thank
good
you.
thing.
Yeah, I have to. And it's scary because I had really thought that if I'd left the right note that my parents would be sad for a minute, but then go, yeah, I can see why she did it and get over it. And it's like, God, that's not true. That's really not true, Shawndra. And, and I believe it now. And, but there were times when I chose not to kill myself because I didn't have enough life insurance. And I'm like, well, if I'm going to kill myself, I might as well give my parents enough money to pay off their house. God. But that's what I had.
You want to be considerate about killing yourself.
Exactly, right? And maybe that's a female thing. I don't know, but it's like, it's like, no, we would rather have a mortgage and have you still here, please. But it's amazing how when your mind is twisted that way, that you can really convolute the truth. And I am grateful every day to the animals for helping me see that truth.
Yeah, those are those stories that we get twisted into, and they start to define us, and then we just start to believe them. And it could have started from the smallest seed that really wasn't there to begin with. It's just your perception at the time
Yes.
took it to mean something, and then slowly other things happen, and then you're still in that story. You're reinforcing it more and more and more. You're just not letting it go. And
Right.
then it just completely takes over your life to the point where you don't even want to live anymore. It's just crazy how we as a species let that happen to
Yes.
ourselves.
We really do. And I mean, and I can look back now, and because I did not see myself as worthy of being treated well, those are the men I brought into my life. And they didn't treat me well, and whether it was a narcissist or anyone else, I mean, they kicked me to the curb when they were through with whatever they were done with. But that was my self-fulfilling prophecy. I had convinced myself that that's all I deserved. And so certainly not what I would deserve now, but it is, and I can look back, and I don't know that, because some people have asked me, do you think that healers go through certain things so that they can empathize with people more and they can, have those personal experiences? Maybe, maybe not. But I know a lot of people who've gone through challenging times that are not healers. And so I think it's our own personal path. But then when we choose to share those, to help others, to say, you're not alone. You are a valuable addition to this planet, and you have every right to be happy, healthy, balanced, and alive. And we make those choices to do that is when it can help others. And that's why I do. That's why I talk about it. It's not for sensational purposes or for people who feel sorry for me, because I don't want that. But it's just to kind of normalize the conversation. That, and help people too, because I had it happen with me. When I would be brave enough to bring up suicide, people do what everyone has probably heard is like, no, don't say that. Okay, I already think I don't deserve to be alive. Now you're telling me I don't deserve to say my truth? Wow, okay, I won't. So I shut up. And I did not speak to that person again. And hopefully having these conversations is, it's scary for someone you care about to say, I'm thinking about killing myself. But instead of telling them, don't think that, don't say that, just stop and take a breath, and you can be honest. I wish someone had been honest and go, I'm not going to lie, that scares the crap out of me. What can I do? How long have you been thinking about it? Have you ever tried? Do you know how you do it? Do you know what triggers you? I mean, there are so many other questions that you could ask that would let them know I'm safe to talk to. I'm not going to judge you. I'm not going to tell you don't be who you are. Because in my perception or my life, I was already feeling unworthy of living my life. And then, so I would reach out and people would say, no, you're not worthy. And that's not what they meant. But again, that twisted mindset altered everything.
Interesting. Yeah, and I I personally think we're all here to learn different things. We chose to come here. We chose to kind of fall into these roles, and some people are here to cause us pain so that we can grow and learn from. I mean, I do believe that, but it's also, we still get a choice in the matter of how long we let it affect us.
Right.
We get to say, okay, you know what, I'm done with this. I don't want to play this part anymore. I learned what I needed to learn. Let's go do something else now.
Yeah.
There is always that trope of, you can't be a healer unless you had some incurable virus that put you on your deathbed when you were 3 years old, and then miraculously a light came down into the room and healed you. And now you can talk to animals and touch people and heal them. And
Yeah.
that's the only way you can be a healer. Like, you don't even have to go through this type of modality. You don't have to be in Reiki or shamanism or quantum touch or whatever else is out there.
Right.
You can be a healer just by leading by example and using your own words. That's
Absolutely.
one thing I noticed with my own father after he passed away, was all these people from around the world that he knew from all of his travels were reaching out because they loved him, but he wasn't a healer in any, technical definition, but
Right.
all the stories they would tell is like, oh yeah, he bailed me out of this. He helped me do this. He helped me get my first house. He helped, convince me to quit drinking and took me to AA. Like, he was doing all these things, but he wasn't a quote unquote, he wouldn't call himself a healer.
No, but he was.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's that kind of thing. Like, you don't necessarily need to do energy work to be a healer, or, sometimes just being there for someone and letting them know that it's okay is all
Yes.
they need.
Absolutely. I completely agree. That is just so true. And that's where we get to make our choice on how do we react to something. And, there are times when we see something that's out of balance. And I remember there was one, it was a child that I just knew was being abused. And I don't know how badly, but it was just, mother might have just been having a bad day, but it was the child, it was a toddler. And I was angry at the mother. And I had to stop because there was nothing I could do to prove it. And I had to make a choice. Do I get angry at the mother and let her know I know what you're doing and it's wrong? Or do I look at that child and say, you know what? Not all adults are scary. You are loved. You are perfect. I'm sorry if what you're going through is what I think you're going through. But you know what? You are a beautiful child and I hope you do well. And that's the best I can do. Sometimes it's planting those seeds of love and forgiveness and hope is all we can do. Because I never saw the person again. It was just a fleeting kind of passing thing. And I had nothing to go on to call the police or anything on. It was just a feeling. And I got to choose. And thankfully, I chose to hopefully help that child instead of taking anger. And then because the child would have just seen me as another angry adult,
Yeah.
right? And how would it have helped that child? It wouldn't have at all. These choices that we get every day, and you're absolutely right, leading by example. And I mean, I look at even some comedians or something. It's like they are healers. They help us laugh. They help us bring balance to a crazy, chaotic world. And not the mean humor. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the ones who just genuinely help us go, yeah, there's something good in life. I consider them healers because we need all different kinds of healers. And you're right, it doesn't fit any label where we can hang a sign outside our door and say so and so healer. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah, I guess life coach would be the closest to someone like that.
Right?
So with because you mentioned shamanic journeying as well. So how does that play a role in your work? Do you just journey like at your house for the animal? Do you actually journey with the animal or with the client? Like, how do you go about doing that when you do the journey work?
It's typically on my own, and then I write it all down and transfer it to them, and then walk them through what I've seen, so we can break it down and do it. And actually, I did it recently with a dog I'm that's severely abused and severely traumatized, and there was zero communication. I mean, that dog, it's been a few months, and I'm barely getting like a few words at a time. But the shamanic journey really helped because that feels safe and I'm connecting to their spirit, not their traumatized physical self. And I can get to that other realm. And bring information to the people that are in his life. They go, oh, okay. And so it guides them, it gives them some perspective on what his reality is, what he is interpreting, and how they can help him. Because I would see things like, I'm seeing very gentle water moving, and it's like, oh, and you could interpret that in a couple ways. You could say, does he need a water feature that's going to help calm him? Or does he need clean water, filtered water? And so we can have those conversations about some of these images that we're seeing. But it's a way to build that trust with him as well, and then give the people in his life some tools to go, that makes sense, that resonates. And just like you were saying before, it's like, okay, right. And I don't know that I've ever had it going, I don't know, none of that makes sense. Nope, don't have anything there. There's always been something that's like a trigger that will bring more conversation or something that we can try.
And so do you work with like local rescue places too, or do you just wait till someone calls you when they need you type of thing? Or
It's typically when they call me, but I also am on the board of directors and I volunteer with Kindred Souls Foundation, which is a nonprofit organization that helps with abandoned, abused, and neglected homeless or cats and dogs. And so we do a lot of outreach with senior humans and pairing them with senior animals, and then we pay for that. Excuse me. And then I also do outreach with the low income and unhoused. Excuse me. So where we will bring in and do vaccines and spay neuter vouchers, so they don't have to pay for that, so we can reduce the number of unwanted cats and dogs, basic medical care, and bringing them food so they can do that. So in that respect, and that's when I can just send love. So it's not necessarily, we just did outreach actually a few days ago, and it's not that I'm having conversations with these animals, but again, treating these people with respect, because by the grace of God, any of us could probably be homeless within a few months if something happens. There's no guarantee that I'm not going to be able to, always pay my bills or whatever. But treating them with respect and giving those animals the hope and giving them the love. And that's what a lot of these people really respond to, is the acceptance of how perfect their animal is. And you probably have seen that. Everyone thinks they have the perfect animal and they're all right. Everyone is, and treating them with respect and helping them help their animal, which also helps them and gives them more confidence and things like that. So I do work in that respect still. I used to do deployments to disaster sites, and I ended up needing to stop that because that was breaking my soul. And so the first one I went to was Hurricane Katrina, and I was completely unprepared. And that was in 2005, so we're coming up on the 20th anniversary of it. And it was some of the most horrible things I've ever seen. By the time I went there, I had to wait because Hurricane Rita was coming in, so I had to wait. So it was late September, early October by the time I got there. And so you're looking at 6 weeks where animals had been trapped in homes because they have hurricanes all the time. And the standard procedure is fill the tub up with water, open up a bag of dog food or cat food, and just leave it there. And you come back in a few days and everything's fine. Well, they didn't know it was going to be 6 or 8 weeks. And some of these animals were still alive, but absolutely emaciated. And the scary thing then too was the conversation of animals being rescued had not really been brought up in disaster situations. And so armed military were there on the ground, and they were given very explicit instructions: you rescue humans only. And as you know, you don't defy orders. And so they would go to the homes, and the people would be forced to leave their animals behind, which I can't even imagine. And then they'd say, fine, just go without me, don't rescue me. And that wasn't part of their orders. It's like, no, you're coming with me. And there's like, my animal's coming. And they would get into an argument, and they'd say, you can leave your animal behind, or you can watch me put a bullet in its head. Which do you choose? And no one should ever have to make that decision again. And because of Katrina, no one will. And that's one reason they say there will never be another Hurricane Katrina. Not because of the Cat 5 hurricane, but because of the breakdown in those kinds of things, where we're not rescuing animals, we're not taking service animals with them, where police, military, and fire can all communicate on the same bandwidth, and those kinds of things. The human failures will not happen again. But it was just one trauma after another. But that was also when I was going through my depression and suicidal ideation, and I was proving my worth. I was saying, look at what a good person I am. I'm helping animals. And I went down to Chile after the earthquake and tsunamis there and saw some of the worst things I've ever seen in my life. I've been to dogfighting rings and hoarding cases and fires, floods, hurricanes, tornadoes. I mean, pretty much everything except a volcano. And I finally came to the realization that I don't need to put myself in that position to be of service, because it was really starting to damage my soul. And that's not helpful. And that's why I stepped away. So I still support those organizations that do it. And I still do outreach when I can in a healthy way for me. But that again comes from having an honest conversation with myself, going, why am I doing it? And what is it serving? And how can I do it without damaging myself?
Yep. Finding that balance even within yourself.
Yeah.
And with that, so I guess one interesting thought I had was like, what's one of the cases where you just saw like the most shift in the animal or the biggest change, without getting into too many details of names and stuff, and
Right.
just in case, but
I would say there was this one horse that I remember that was 18 years old and had been abused its entire life and neglected and lived on its own, which, horses are pack animals. They need companionship. And I went in and I was volunteering at a rescue organization at that time, and went in, and this horse had the lowest life quality I have ever seen. It was emaciated. It had physical problems, but its will to live was like non-existent, whether you call it chi or ki or anything else. I mean, its life energy was so bad that it almost scared me, but it's like, okay, you're still here, so let's work with that. And I would go in, and I told the woman at the time, I'm like, I'm coming in every day. Normally I come in once a week. I'm coming in every day, after work or whatever, and helping this horse. And I just did Reiki. I just did tuning forks, and I just sent love. So it wasn't even an option to have a conversation, because that would have been far too much for this animal to handle. But all I can do is send love. And I sent love, and I sent love, and I sent love. And I did hands-on healing. And it took, because I went every day for about a week, and then I started going just, once a week or so. And that horse actually did turn around. And I remember the day that I was out there, and I could see the lights come on in its eyes, and it was like blink, blink. And it was as if their will to live came back. And I feel so honored to be there to see that shift in them. It's like, wow, okay. And again, it wasn't like it was going to run around the pasture or anything, but it's like, I think I can do this. I think I can do this. It's like, and I can help you. And I am happy to help you.
did he have like any messages or something after you got him back to, I guess, normal?
Yeah, right.
Saying
The
quotation
messages
marks.
were of gratitude, and he gave me permission to tell his story so that others could see. And it was more the story to other humans. So not even necessarily to help other animals, but to help other humans, going, if their will to live, if there's a sliver of light there, do what you can and help them. But, and that's one thing I don't push, because at that point, like, to go back and talk about the abuse or the neglect, what purpose would it have served? And so unless it has a purpose, like I did with a cat once that was having severe physical issues and couldn't keep anything down, was vomiting and was having like open sores, and they couldn't figure it out, I pushed for that to get some information, and come to find out that cat had drank water out of an old gasoline can that had tipped over, and so it had ingested gasoline, so it was like internal damage. And once the vet knew that, they could fix it, and it was just amazing. But in the case of abuse, where now it's like, you were terrible and now you're more balanced, there's no reason to go relive that trauma. And so I will not push those animals to give me information just so people can know what happened. We don't need to know. We don't need to know the details, and I'm not going to make them re-traumatize themselves. But sometimes there are reasons, good reasons, legitimate reasons, to push them a little bit, going, I need to know what happened so that we can help you, like with that cat. So,
Have you ever had to prove that abuse was happening? Like, I don't know if maybe you were called into a house and the owner's saying that he didn't do anything to the dog, but the dog's obviously looking pretty messed up, or maybe the owners aren't knowing who's abusing it and it's the neighbor, for example. Like, I don't know, is
the
anything like that
closest,
ever?
yeah, the closest I've had, because typically anyone who abuses an animal will not reach out to
Yeah, I
me.
don't think they
You know,
would, but that's
they
why.
don't want to know. The closest that's come to me is I have a friend who had a cat that used to be an indoor-outdoor cat, and they ended up having to lose its leg because they found it like on the side of the road, severely injured. And at first we thought it was like had been hit by a car, but then the vet said these injuries are not consistent with being hit by a car. That's not what happened. And so I did connect, and they wanted to know what happened. And I never knew the person who did it, but what had happened was somebody was angry, and I got sort of an image of the person, and had picked the cat up by the leg and flung him and threw him. And so that's why this twisting spiral thing, and then he threw him into like blackberry bushes, and he got beat up there. But I said, I didn't know who the person was. I gave a description, and so they kind of walked around the neighborhood to see if they could see anybody like that, and they didn't. So for all we know, it could have been somebody just walking by, driving by, car broke down, and they were angry, whatever it was. But those kinds of things have happened to where at least it puts some perspective on what happened and why, and it wasn't a hit and run necessarily. But, obviously the cat is an indoor cat now. It's like, yeah, you don't get to go out anymore.
That makes sense. Yeah, I wouldn't think somebody abusing a cat would call you, but I was curious if well, we don't know what's going on. Maybe she can tell us who's doing it.
Yeah. And it's usually been after the fact, like if an animal has come into, like the one cat that drank the gasoline, they had rescued him from a shelter. And so it was a previous life kind of thing that they have no control over at this point.
Yeah.
And sometimes I have to, like when I was doing disaster response and there would be cruelty cases, but we would get called in with law enforcement and they already knew because a neighbor had turned them in or something. And at that point, they don't need my experience to say it was them. They already knew it was them. But I can send healing to the animal, the horses, the cows, whatever it happened to be, and send them love and hope that this is not going to happen and that not all humans are this way. And that's actually it's a really difficult thing, but I have done it several times for people who couldn't be there with their animal when they passed, and sometimes in disaster situations, is to be that loving face. The last thing that animal sees before they're euthanized is I can be there for them and give them hope that there are humans that are listening. We are paying attention. Not all of us are causing harm. And we love you. None of this was your fault, and go with peace. And it's difficult, but I consider it an honor to be able to give them that balance. And I did that in Palau. I went out and we were training animal control officers on just more humane handling and how to do it, because before they don't have a high rate of adoption, and so they end up euthanizing most of their animals anyway. And so the attitude had kind of become, it's not going to matter, they're going to die in a few days anyway. And so we help teach them it does matter. Even if it's 3 days, their lives matter. And so it was a beautiful thing to see how it changed from chaotic and noisy and, and doing all these things to calm, quiet, and the animals all were euthanized. But the last thing they saw was a loving human. It's like, wow. And those things make a difference, I believe.
I do too. I think it does matter. And then I guess my next question is, how does one learn to be an animal communicator? You mentioned taking a class from a Jerry Ryan. Does she still teach? Is that something that's out there? Like, I've heard of animal Reiki, but I've never really seen too many animal communicators teaching.
Yeah.
If that's something you do, or that's
I do it, not very often, but I do it. And there are people who do it online. You can buy books and CDs. They still do CDs, online programs that will teach you how to do that. And one of the best things, if you do it that way, is practicing, because then it strengthens those new muscles you're developing to go, that is right. And that's one of the first things I did after I learned was we would get together and we would say, okay, we're going to talk to this rabbit. And we didn't know anything other than the rabbit, than how old it was and the name. Okay. And so we would all tune in and then we would share what we got, and we all got the same things, which was like, we really are talking. It's not me making stuff up in my head. So practice with other people and confirming your stories really builds that confidence that you're doing it. But I online, certainly. And again, I don't do it that often, but I do teach occasionally. And it's probably maybe something I should do. But one of the things I'm doing now is on my author Facebook page, is sending messages from the animals, because we live in a time that's pretty chaotic and divisive and scary, and the animals can give us messages of hope. They can give us messages to kind of ground ourselves and go, okay. And that's one of the things I'm going to be doing, is just sending these free messages to give people hope, to give people a way to go, okay, I can breathe through this, and we can hopefully make a difference, because I believe we're all connected. I believe that our spirit, and one of the things the animals have done several months ago, they sent me a phrase. And this is something that anyone can do. It takes like 5 seconds at the most, doesn't cost you a dime. And the animals have said it makes a difference. And I'll give you a little bit of background so it makes sense when you hear it. But when we talk about all life, kind of like you did, the rock people, the tree people, the animal people, is all life. So we're talking the trees, we're talking the water. Anything that can die has life. So it's not just humans, it's not just our companion animals, it's everything. It's the water, it's the air, it's the trees. And when we talk about balance, if we were to list everything that's wrong in this world, it would be too big of a list. We couldn't do it. So when we're thinking of bringing balance, it covers everything: the wars, the racism, the misogyny, the child abuse, the destroying our environment that we depend on for survival, all of it, every single thing. And so here's the phrase the animals gave me that we can say: thank you for all life on planet Earth being perfectly balanced in every way. Simple, to the point, all life being balanced. And if all of us are balanced, we're not causing harm. We're not destroying the planet. We're not harming each other. We're not harming ourselves. So just thank you for all life on planet Earth being perfectly balanced in every way. And that's something that each and every one of us can do. And I think the more and more that each of us do something like that, it is a collective. It grows and grows and grows to where we can bring balance. And have you heard the story that grandmothers used to tell their grandchildren about a forest fire and hummingbird and jaguar?
No, it doesn't sound familiar.
Okay, I'll see if I can remember it the best I can. But there was a huge forest fire. All the animals were fleeing for safety, and Jaguar was coming out, and he saw Hummingbird fly into the fire, and then a few minutes later fly back out. And so he stopped him and said, "Hummingbird, what are you doing?" And he said, "This is my home. I'm flying to the lake and filling my beak with water to try and put the fire out." And Jaguar laughed and said, "Are you crazy? Do you think you and your little beak can put that fire out?" And Hummingbird said, "No, I know I can't, but this is my home. It feeds me and my family. I have to do my part." And just then the forest spirits were so moved by Hummingbird's love and passion for the forest, that they sent a torrential downpour and extinguished the flames. And grandmothers would tell their grandchildren, if you want to see a difference, it's not up to you to fix all the world's problems. It's up to you to take care of and mind your own personal piece of your universe. And when each one of us does that, the world will heal herself. And so sometimes it gets overwhelming, but it's like, I just have to do my part. And
That's what I tell people: just act as local as you can, work with what's available to you and what you can change. Like,
yes,
you can't change a war that's 5,000 miles away or wherever, but we can act locally and try to change what's going on here, and hopefully those ripple out and
yes,
things will get better, because if we're putting the right people in the right spots locally, hopefully that carries on to the rest of the state and the country and wherever.
yes. And that's when we honor our path and cause no harm and believe that everyone else is doing the same, that's when that does spread out, because it will have an impact. If each of us would actually honor our path and cause no harm, the earth will heal herself
Yep.
and humans will evolve.
Stop worrying about party lines and everything else and just do what's right,
Just do what's right. Do the loving,
regardless.
kind, open-minded thing and accept, and that doesn't mean we have to be friends with everyone. It's not like I have to condone anyone's behavior or join them. I can still treat them with respect. I can still send love. And that's something that is new to me, or was new to me, is that idea that I don't have to have my opinions. I don't have to share my opinions with others. And when I see someone who says something, and I've been called all kinds of names, terrible names, for being an animal communicator. And, and I could choose to defend myself and get righteous, or I can just say, Thank you for your opinion. I don't agree with you, and I hope you find the balance you're seeking. Because, and I'm not trying to be snarky about it, but to me, if they're calling me horrible names, there's something out of balance. And that's not on me. But I can send love and say, I do hope you find your balance to where they don't feel the need to call people names just because they don't live their life exactly the same way. And that's what I can do. I can plant that seed and I can choose to honor my path with love and grace. You know, doesn't mean I don't go, really? You're going to call me a name? Come on, because I talk to animals? Okay. But, they're not going to listen to any argument I have. So that's when I can just, I don't have to agree with them. I don't turn my back on them, but I can do something.
And that's what we're missing a lot these days is, like we mentioned earlier, trauma challenges bring growth. People don't want that anymore. They want it to be super easy, but then a lot of people are living in this victim mindset because then it gets them these weird social points to make them better than other people because they had it harder than other people based upon X, Y, or Z,
Yeah,
whatever you want to put on there. And then it's if you don't 100% agree with somebody, then you're automatically wrong and evil. And this is on both sides. It doesn't matter
right,
which side you want to talk to. It doesn't matter. It's all nonsense. It's
right.
like, and then the media just inflames it to keep us attacking each other instead of what really matters. I mean, if you looked back at 2008 when we had Occupy Wall Street, everybody was against these rich capitalist people, and then all of a sudden it became about race, sex, and gender. The media just started pushing that instead, and then we've been fighting each other ever since, and it's just getting worse, and money hasn't got any better. It's gotten worse, and
Yeah.
economy's going to hell no matter who's in charge. Like,
Yeah. And you wonder why, and I don't have the answers for that, but all I can do is, when it seems overwhelming, is do something like what you're doing with your podcast, which is spreading that hope and giving people tools, regardless of what it is. Something's going to resonate with someone going, I can do that.
yeah.
I can read that book. I can do whatever. I can say that one sentence every day and change my piece of the universe. And that's where we have to focus on, because you're right. Nobody's evil because they don't think like me or drive the same car as me, whatever. But it's when we can look at them and have compassion for what they might be going through and give them the benefit of the doubt that they're not just an evil person because they called me a name or they did something. But, even if you go back to like dog hoarding or animal cruelty, in those cases, there are people who would say, lock them up. They should do to them what they did to the dogs. And it's like, okay, no, because that's not going to be the solution to the problem. They didn't become an abuser because someone, they didn't get a good enough beating in their own life because someone didn't electrocute them. That's not why they became an abuser. So what we need to do is similar to what they do with out at Wolf Haven. They have what's called, and it's the whole statewide Wolf Advisory Group, the WAG group, and it's ranchers, it's hunters, it's environmentalists, it's wolf, people. It's all these people coming together with different perspectives, saying, how can we find a way to do it? How can we work together to get along? Which I believe we can get along, and that's what matters to me, is working with and assuming the best in them and helping them find a way. And if that's like an advisory group where you're working with them on a quarterly basis, or even if you're just in the grocery store and someone says something horrible and you can just send them love and wish them the peace that they're looking for, because something is out of balance. If they're doing those kinds of things, stealing or whatever it happens to be, something's out of balance. And it's up to us as those that are more aware to send that love and maybe envision a path for them to find where they don't feel the need to do that. And I have to believe that those things can happen, because it's like, I have to believe in something like that. Otherwise it's just like, oh no.
I think it's getting there. I think we've kind of hit this turning point and people are starting to realize, okay, maybe we don't need to go this crazy about things. Like we used to all be able to have an opinion and it wasn't that big of a deal.
Right.
Let's get back to that. Like, I don't have to agree with everything you do, say, like, want with your life. That's cool. As long as we're not hurting each other, what does it matter?
Right.
Like it shouldn't
Absolutely.
matter anymore. Like I don't really care what you want to do as long as you're not hurting anybody.
Yes, exactly. And I mean, if you know, I mean, personally, I mean, a purple mohawk would be awesome, but you know, there are people who would judge you for wearing, ooh, that hair. It's like, is it hurting you though? Is it really? You could look away if it really disturbs you that much. Look away, or ask yourself, why am I so triggered by a purple mohawk? I mean, what do I care? But you're right. We can all be different, and yet, and that's some of the thing. And I need to find. I'm not an artistic person, but I want to find someone who is an artist because to me, I see the core that we are working towards, and whether that's heaven, Buddhahood, nirvana, ascension, whatever you want to label it. And then there are all these paths. It's open on the outside, and all these paths going in, and it's every single path, and there are no wrong paths. But that also, to my mind, explains why sometimes you feel like you're circling because you are, or you have this intersect, like, what was that about? You know, and you realize that somebody came into your life and just went through, and you're like, okay, it's just they're on their path, I'm on mine. We just happen to intersect for a minute. And there are times when something happens, and I think it's more authentic to stop. And in the military world, they would say, you know, take a knee. Stop and say, I'm covered with mud. This sucks right now. But to pretend you're not covered in mud, to pretend it doesn't suck and just try and forge on isn't really helpful. It's staying stuck in that mode that sometimes becomes unhelpful. But to stop and actually go, like just recently, unfortunately, I had to euthanize my dog. He was a soulmate. And it's been, I know, he's the seventh dog I have had to euthanize as an adult. And his hit me hard, harder than any of the others. And so at that point, I stopped and I said, I'm going to need a few days. And I said, this is terrible. And I honored my grief. I did what I needed to do to grieve through it. And then when I was ready, got up, dusted myself off, and said, I can put one foot in front of the other. It's not that I'm happy about it. I still cry about it, but I'm able to function. And I don't know that I would have if I had pretended, oh, it's fine. I've done it, you know, 6 other times and, you know, I'll get over it and it's everything, blah, blah, blah. Honor where you are, take a breath, and then get your strength back. And there's no guilt in any of that. I don't think, I think it's actually a stronger thing to do when each of us can say, I need to take a knee right now and just let this happen. So,
Yeah, my teacher calls that, have the feelings, but don't get stuck in the emotion.
yes,
'Cause once you're stuck, you can have that knee, you can take that break, but the break might not, it shouldn't last like 3 or 4 weeks or 6 months or a year.
right.
Sometimes you just got to get back on that horse and start doing things again and feel the feelings, let them go. And then if something comes up to remind you, like the loss of a loved one, there's going to be days where, I don't know, maybe you see a dog bowl that you didn't pick up or a dog bed, or maybe you hear a barking in the distance and it's going to bring back those memories. And that's good. Let them flow, let them happen, and then move on because that's all we
Exactly.
can do is just let it come through, move on. And yeah, that sounds easier to say than it is to do. I get it,
Yeah.
but that's part of that process of just not getting stuck.
Right. Yes. I don't think it's pretending that we don't have the feelings is not helpful. And like you said, getting stuck is certainly not helpful. You know, but and grief is one of those things that will probably always be with people,
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
whenever we are grieving, but it doesn't have to look the same. The edges get a little softer. They're not quite as jagged, and it doesn't happen quite as often. So the grief is always there. It's like a scar that's always going to be there, but I've learned to adapt. It's healed, and that's the way it is now. Yeah, so that perfect balance of honoring where you are and not getting stuck there, because that's not helpful. And I don't think from any animal that I know, they don't want us to get stuck. And it was honestly my depth of my grief because I've worked with somebody else and they said, he's grieving. Norman was his name. And I rescued him actually from Norman, Oklahoma, after the earthquake or the tornado that hit there. And that's in Moore, Oklahoma. He survived an EF5 tornado, poor guy. But my the depth of my grief was affecting him because he didn't want me to be hurting so deeply, you know. And I said, let him know I need to do this. I need to process this and get it out of my system. This raw, ugly, horrible crying, and I'll be able to move on. And so once he understood that I wasn't going to get stuck there, and hold on to that for the rest of my life, it was like, okay, and I have had conversations with him, and then I have, I see him every once in a while, or I'll hear him like what I was his squeaky toy or something, and he reminds me he's still here. So,
I guess that brings up an interesting question. So, at least on the human side of things, like at least for me personally, I have like an ancestral altar. So when it's a relative that's passed away and they're on the altar, say it's their birthday, we might put like a small plate of food out. If it's on their death anniversary, we might do something for them. But it's just a consistent honoring of the ancestors, letting them know that we're thinking of them and giving gratitude that they were alive to bring us, basically. Have you thought of or even considered doing something like that with animals? I never would have even considered that, to be honest, until this conversation. But it's like I'm wondering if there's a part to play with that as well.
well, and I do personally, I mean, like Joey is in the story. He's the one who, in my book, and I do keep mementos from each one. And I know when I rescued them, when they died. And there are times, and the big thing I did was for a while, because I ended up burying Norman, but all my other dogs I had cremated. And I finally got to the point where I was like, you know what? I'm ready to let them go. And so I went out to a sacred tree near here and I honored each one of them. I remembered the love and the joy that they brought into my life, how I had helped them, how I had rescued them, and kind of got whatever feelings from them that they wanted to send at that moment. And then I opened the box and I released their ashes. And each one, it was really interesting because each one kind of took a different path. Some went that way, some went straight up, some went straight down, and it was just like, okay, and then I came back and I burned the boxes because that's what felt right for me. So I do believe that having that, because they have changed our lives for me, and maybe not everyone feels the same way, but it's like an ancestor. They came into our lives. They were a deep part of our lives, especially those that have opened us to new beginnings, like Joey did, and some of the others that taught me things that I would not have learned if they had not pushed me to learn it. Because you know how it is. If everything's easy, if it's like insert dog and everything's like, life is easy, you don't push yourself. That's how we are as humans, and that's one of the reasons we learn what we learn, is because we are getting pushed out of our comfort zone, and we have a choice. We always have a choice to where we could say, this is too much and I'm going to give the dog away. Or we can say, I'm not giving up on this dog and I'm going to do whatever it takes to help them, regardless of what that looks like. So I like that idea of doing that. And even in Stillicum, and I don't know if they still do it because it was up to before COVID, when they did it, and they would have blessing of the animals. And they would have, I believe it was a Catholic priest, that would come and you would bring either your animal there in person or a memento of them, and they would he would walk by and bless every single animal that was there. And I thought that was a beautiful thing to do. I'm not Catholic, but I still felt the love of that. And I thought it was healing for everyone to be there in community, celebrating something that's really important to us.
It's interesting, yeah, because I mean, ancestors doesn't necessarily need to be a bloodline either. So it's,
True.
as you could be adopted, this family that adopted you, you now have all of their ancestors as well as your biological family. So you have double the ancestors when you're adopted. So you're even more fortunate and lucky
Right.
than anyone else. And so we consider pets family. It's just an interesting idea. I never really considered it until now.
Yeah,
Yeah, maybe they
I
should
love
go
it.
on the ancestral altar.
Yeah, exactly. Because they have, like we said earlier, that oftentimes we will do more for the animals than we will for ourselves or even other humans. Because animals give us something that we typically don't get from other humans. It's not just the unconditional love, that's very important, but they give us unconditional acceptance, which we don't get hardly anywhere else. Norman didn't care what I looked like without my makeup. He didn't care what I looked like in my day pajamas or, whatever it was when I was having a bad day, how much I weighed, whatever. He didn't care about any of that. He accepted me for my soul, for my heart, for who I am. And yeah, and I honor that with the animals because I don't get that from a lot of humans. It's always like, you're nice, but, could you just, it's like, no, I'm not going to alter myself for you. Animals have never asked me to alter myself for.
Well, with that, before we start wrapping it up, though, there's one question that I like to ask each guest is, what advice would you give to somebody who's just starting out on their path into spiritualism, just trying to find themselves, whatever you want to define it? What advice would you give them?
Oh, don't give up. Believe what your heart tells you. And if if you ever get a message of you shouldn't be doing this, or are you sure you're good enough, or something like that, that's your ego. You can ask that to step aside and listen to what your heart says. Tune in to what resonates with your heart and follow that. And always remember, you are a valued asset to this planet. We need you. You're here for a reason. We treasure you. And whatever it is you have to offer is going to be welcome. When it's from your heart and it causes no harm, it's beautiful. And we need every bit of that we can get.
Nice. Well said. And with that, why don't you let people know where they can find you? I'll put everything in the show notes too, but if there's anything you want to promote, or website, Facebook, whatever.
Yeah. And I have my website. It's called Sanskrit Healing, Sanskrit. So my mother thought she made up my name, and it ends up, it's Sanskrit. So that's why I named my business that. Between the name of my business and my name, none of it's easy. So I'm glad you got the notes. But I do have on my Facebook author page, which is Shawndra Michell. And I was telling Jeremy earlier that, when I got divorced, I kept my married name, which is Mitchell without a T. But then when I wrote the book, I'm like, I'm not doing it in his name. So I did my maiden name, which is McWhorter, but then it gets confusing because you got both names. So anyway, that's why there's all these names. But that's where I will be doing the readings when the animals come in, and what they will share with you, so you can get some messages of hope and things like that. And so between those two, that's probably the best way to do it. And my book, of course, if you ever want it, it's on Amazon or any of the onlines. It's called What They Want Us to Know.
Do you want to show that again for people?
Yes. Yeah.
I will say, when I was looking at that on your website, I don't know if it's changed, but the book was marked as click here to pre-order. It took me to Amazon. It still let me buy it. It wasn't a problem. But just for people who are going to your website and are seeing available for pre-order, just click the link. It'll still work.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, that definitely needs to be updated, because it was pre-order in 2021. So apparently I don't go on my own website that often.
So I was like, oh, okay. I thought I saw that it was out there, and then, yeah, but it works.
Good.
Click the link one way or the other, it'll take you there. But
Awesome.
just for you to change it so people know.
Awesome. Thank you. Yes, that makes it easier.
Perfect. So yeah, I appreciate your time. I really enjoyed having you on. It was fun.
Thank you, Jeremy. I really appreciate the opportunity. It's been a great time.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Shaman Stories podcast. If you have any interest in the services that I provide or the services of my guest, please click the link in the show notes below. Thank you. And until next time, have a good journey.